Okay, first thing that I wanted to say, my slides might confuse you because I haven't really timed them. So they might be premonitions of things that I'm going to talk about or memories.
Oh dear.
Okay, so I come from foam. Foam was right, which the way that we describe it is a network of small laboratories for what we call speculative culture. We borrowed this term from Bruce Sterling, who has been mentioned many times, and we describe it as a phenomenon where a diverse group of people from a range of disciplines and cultures, makers and thinkers, educators and gardeners, live and work together to prototype and experiment with possible futures. Foam is like an archipelago of experiments in speculative culture, where groups of people tinker with different realities, or as we like to say, grow their own worlds, where some of our islands are rock hard and they become formal funded studios in Brussels, Amsterdam, Stockholm, and Kernau, while others are more like sandy walking islets, appearing and disappearing with the flow of people, money, and resources. The worlds or realities that we grow are very diverse, but they share three common characteristics. We cultivate things and phenomena that grow, evolve, decay, and die, or transform into something else. We have faith in the pliant nature of reality, and we subscribe to the principles of grow your own and do it yourself. And we explore and create whole worlds, whole realities, or total experiences. Please note my use of the plural realities. In Foam's view, there has never been one but many realities, or as Robert Anton Wilson called them, reality tunnels. We can only change, improve, destroy, or neglect our narrow local reality that we can perceive and live within. So when Honor asked me to speak at Improving Reality, I chose to speak about foam as I live, breathe, and cultivate this particular reality every day. Speaking about any other reality, especially the one with a capital R used in the title of this conference, would mean either improving an illusion, as the Buddhists never cease to remind us, or slicing through many individual and collective reality tunnels that I know nothing about, let alone that I would know how to improve them. What I may think as an improvement of the local reality of someone else might find deeply offensive. However, encouraging people to find ways to improve realities in the plural, or the mesh of reality tunnels, is something that I'm very comfortable with, and I would even dare say that I know a little bit about. So that's my terminology clarified. Now let's look at these realities of the foam archipelago in the context of improving and reimagining. And I'd like to begin with a small exercise. We do a lot of participatory stuff at Foam, so I need you to get involved a bit. I invite you to close your eyes or look without focusing somewhere a few meters in front of you. Then take a deep breath. Now think about one thing in your life, in your reality, that you would like to improve. Don't analyze too much, just see what bubbles up. One thing in your life that you'd like to improve. Say to yourself a few times, I'd like to improve this or that. Now imagine what your life would be like if this became a fact rather than a hope. How would you feel? What would you be doing to improve this? What else is around to make this happen? And finally, think about how you would get from here to there. How could your reality be otherwise? What would you have to do? What would you have to change? What would you have to throw away? Now take one more deep breath and return to the reality of here and now. This is a simplified, probably oversimplified and stripped down example of what we do at FOAM. We look at what is, speculate on what could be, and most importantly, find ways to prototype and test the various answers in something that you might call a real-life lab or an embodiment of speculation. I'll focus on 3 examples from our work. I'll talk a bit about responsive environments, alternate reality narratives, and future pre-enactments or rehearsals. When we started FOAM back in 2000, we began growing seedlings of worlds in mixed reality, a place where digital media become more tangible and physical materials more responsive. Around the same time, we began our longest-running initiative called Grow World, in which we attempt to minimize borders and extend the edges between the human and the vegetal. Working with plants and humans necessarily brought us onto environmental issues related to the effects of human actions on the ecosystems in which we live, and the general apathy, in part due to these effects not being directly perceivable. In this case, we posed the question, what if long-term effects of human actions on our surroundings could be made more apparent? And we designed responsive environments where mediascapes could react to people's movement, evolving over time and with increased contact. These rather abstract environments that you saw a few minutes ago would react and behave as real gardens, rewarding their visitors who tended to them and cultivated the media, the spaces, and each other. People began creating their own myths and stories about the places they visited. They talked about birds and plants and rock formations that they gradually got attached to. They would return with their friends and families and sometimes camp in there in this abstract dark space for hours on end, as if in an alien parkland. From generative responsive spaces, we moved on to connecting living gardens with online games, and most recently, we developed an entangled alternate reality narrative called Burrowed Scenery, and you are seeing some images from that at the moment. Burrowed Scenery was reality reimagined so that humans could communicate with plants, with cities as places of entangled interaction between the human and the vegetal, where plants don't just provide us with food and materials, but become neighbors, teachers, and even gateways to the planetary other that McKenna told us about. It began with a story about an alternate reality, past, future, or parallel, doesn't matter, where plants are a central aspect of human society. It was a story that wanted to become reality. And by borrowing the setting of everyday life in the city, we attempted to infuse our habitual activities, such as walking or eating, with the vision of a possible future where insatiable economic growth is superseded by an atmosphere-based economy where nature has a voice. We created a physical narrative in an abandoned candy store and devised a series of lab experiments performed by real and fictional characters called the patabotanists, or people proficient in cross-species communication and pollination. In the lab, they studied plants and humans. They conducted fieldwork on the streets and used an online game as a communication portal to urban foragers and remarkable plants. They also invaded FOAM, our studio in Brussels, physically and online, turning FOAM's members into their research assistants and crawling over our wiki in an attempt to archive all we knew about plants as sentient beings. Burrowed Scenery invoked a vision of a possible future where human society would be inspired by plants rather than steam machines, clocks, or computers. Some of the experimenters took the human-plant communication literally and investigated what would happen when we connected our brains to plants and mushrooms, while others were mapping plant people and uncovered a rich network of urban farmers, city ecologists, foragers, activists, wild fermenters, and seed swappers, a relatively invisible layer of people who are already well acquainted with their vegetal mind. Linking consensus reality with this evocative patabotanical world, the boundaries of possible and actual began to blur. One of our visitors said that they heard plants in the Botanic Gardens sing in Hildegard von Bingen's Lingua Ignota. Another occupied the patabotanist's lab and held his birthday party there. He invited his friends to a place where he felt more at home than in the grim reality of his work-life imbalance. The lab became a meeting place and a picnic ground for the staff of the Vooruit, the cultural house that hosted Burrowed Scenery for a few months. The story over these few months began receding in the background and in some cases transforming in real things, such as a vegetal dish served in a nearby cafe, or a cultural organization started to plan their work according to plant growth and seasons and the hours of daylight. With Burrowed Scenery, we attempted to approach something that Vinay Gupta calls visionary adaptation, which he will openly acknowledge is a good idea, but a very awkward term. But I don't have a better one. So to paraphrase Vinay, while we should prepare ourselves for a range of possible futures, it is just as important to envision the futures that we'd like to live in, learn from, and adapt to. These are stories about a possible future that we can steer our actions towards, especially if the story is designed to become a part of our daily lives, sprouting from cracks in our vintage teacups and sprawling wikis. In Burrowed Scenery, we drew upon two main techniques to improve reality: divination and invocation. We created new plant rituals and seasonal celebrations, as well as invoked archetypes of human-plant hybrids and human-plant-computer communication using tarot as our starting point. We expect to see the effects of Burrowed Scenery in the long term, as the tendrils of a vegetal culture can only be perceived in plant time. My last example presents a very different approach to possible futures, more on the adaptation side of visionary adaptation. I'm talking about prototyping a wide range of realities, regardless of personal preference. In this project called Resilience, we looked at what aspects of contemporary culture could be considered resilient in the face of environmental, cultural, and economic turbulences. What should be kept, what should be discarded. We formed a network inspired by medieval guilds that used to be cooperative entities that support and help develop their members' practice, circulate the knowledge via apprenticeships and itinerant journeymen, and keep an archive of its past and present endeavors. In contrast with historical guilds, Resilience was devoted to keeping its sources open and crossing disciplinary boundaries. While most Resilience members chose to explore specific art practices, such as tactical media, edible photovoltaics, and contemporary pilgrimage, at FOAM we looked at future preparedness as an art form. Being prepared for an unknowable future might sound like a paradox. But there are some human behaviors that can help us adapt to different situations. For example, being able to observe without judging, or being aware of how we behave when stress causes our fight or flight reflex to kick in. We found that getting to know our habitual patterns has to be experienced directly and consciously in order to have a lasting effect. This is easier said than done. Think about it. How often do you consciously observe how you behave while you're behaving? Being able to do this requires some practice that can be learned from age-old traditions such as meditation and theater improvisation. When I ask you, what will your future look like, your answer is rarely based on objective facts. You will likely spice it up with assumptions, self-image, expectation, and other things that color your experience of reality. In order to think about the future less based on our hopes and fears, it can help to practice with experiencing different realities in the present. Children do this often with make-believe games. These games are immersive situations where you can experience what a different reality might be like. While in children's games, you might take a role of a prince or a warrior, when pre-enacting a future, you play yourself in a range of different situations. Here too, we can draw on existing practices such as military disaster drills, live-action role-playing games, and other forms of role-playing, as well as historic reenactments. But you might ask, if the future is unknowable, how do you know which futures to choose to pre-enact? This is where we borrow from future studies, foresight or forecasting, or however you want to call it, where futurists have developed techniques to help us narrow the cone of probability, as Peter Schwartz calls it. From a wide open field of possible futures, they can help us see which futures are more or less likely to occur. They observe constants and variables in the present and extrapolate what could potentially emerge in the future. For example, knowing that you just had lunch, it is more likely that you will soon be in need of coffee or a siesta. It's more likely that that will happen than that an army of giant clams or resurrected sea monsters from the sea out here would land in this room and eat you for their lunch. This isn't saying that the giant clams couldn't still emerge in your event horizon. It is just much less likely. A common technique to narrow your range of probable futures is called scenario building, that we already heard. Starting with a burning question, the exercise produces a series of stories about possible futures based on your current situation and various tendencies towards political, social, technological, environmental, and economic changes. At FOAM, we translate these scenarios into something that we call pre-rehearsals or pre-enactments of what might come to pass. In a pre-rehearsal, the group of people who created the scenarios agreed to live for a set amount of time, say an hour, a day, or longer, in a prototype of each of the scenarios. They imagine how they got from where they are now to the possible future they are pre-rehearsing and improvise what they would do, how they would act, and observe what happens to their expectations when they become reality, or at least the prototype of reality. During the pre-rehearsal, the participants are asked to pay attention to the effects of the situation on their own behaviors and actions, as well as on the situation as a whole. We did a series of pre-rehearsals to answer the question, how will we work together on interesting things? Very benign, simple question. Our scenarios ranged from having a bohemian salon populated with individual artists relentlessly pursuing their careers to the flotilla that modeled FOAM as a nomadic tribe, traveling the seas and revitalizing cultures that we encountered. The curious thing was that most of us thought that the flotilla was our preferred future. But while rehearsing, we noticed that the very problems that we have today began resurfacing and amplifying, such as, for example, difficulties with maintaining a collective vision. The rehearsal of a possible future points clearly to where its seeds lay in the present. By experiencing what they could become, we became more aware of them today, which means that we are better able to choose whether to cultivate them or not. In order to make these seeds apparent for everyone involved, after the rehearsal, it's crucial to have a way to share and consolidate what each of us saw, so that we identify the pointers to different possible futures before they begin to unfold. We are currently continuing to explore these themes and methods in a new project called the Future Fabulators, where we hope to find new and exciting ways to thrive in uncertain conditions and walk backwards into the future with our eyes wide open. And I'll just show you a few images from a few rehearsals that we had. And I will leave you with Dougal Hine, who was a member of our Resilience Guild, hitchhiking towards the future. Thank you.